A woman read to my daughter every Saturday. I had no idea she was the CEO. The first time I noticed her, she was sitting cross-legged on the faded blue rug in the children's corner, holding a picture book upside down. My daughter, Lucy, was the one who corrected her. "You're doing it wrong," Lucy said. The woman looked at the book, then at the 6 children gathered around her. "I was testing you." Lucy narrowed her eyes. "You weren't." The woman smiled. "No, I wasn't." That was how Mara entered our Saturdays. At the time, I knew 3 things about her. She wore the same cream cardigan almost every week. She carried a dark leather bag that looked too expensive for the little library in Cedar Falls. And when she read, she gave every character a different voice, even when the voices were terrible. I did not know she ran one of the largest children's media companies in the country. My name is Daniel Hart. I was 36 then, and I owned a repair shop 3 blocks from the library. Mostly washing machines, refrigerators, and the occasional toaster somebody believed had sentimental value. Lucy was 7. Her mother had been gone for 4 years. People think grief arrives like weather, a storm, a season. Something that passes if you wait long enough. Mine was more like dust in an old house. You stopped seeing it, but every time the light changed, there it was. Saturday mornings were for Lucy. I closed the shop at noon on Fridays, packed 2 peanut butter sandwiches, and took her to the library before 10. She would return books with bent corners, choose 6 more, and disappear into the reading circle. That was where Mara sat every week. She never introduced herself with anything more than her first name. "Mara," she said the first time I thanked her. "And your daughter has strong editorial opinions. She gets that from her mother." The words came out before I could stop them. Mara did not tilt her head or soften her voice the way people did when they realized they had stepped near a grave. She only said, "Then her mother had good taste." I looked at her. She turned back to Lucy, who was arguing that dragons would never live in a castle because castles had terrible ventilation. Mara listened as if this were worth serious consideration. That was the first thing I liked about her. She never made kindness look like charity. The next Saturday, one of the brass reading lamps began flickering. The librarian, Mrs. Bell, slapped the switch twice. "It has been doing that all week," she said. "I can look at it," I told her. Mara glanced over the top of her book. "Do you repair everything?" "Only things that admit they're broken." She smiled. "That sounds selective. It keeps the rent paid." I took the lamp apart on a low table while Mara read a story about a bear who could not sleep. Lucy kept looking over to make sure I was watching. When the lamp came back on, warm light spread over the rug. Mara closed the book and said, "There, better." It was a loose wire. I meant the room. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. After that, Saturdays developed a rhythm. Lucy ran to the children's corner. Mara pretended she had not saved the seat beside her. I found small things to repair. A loose shelf bracket, a warped cabinet door, a squeaking wheel on the book cart. Mrs. Bell paid me in coffee I did not ask for and muffins nobody else would eat. Mara always took half a muffin. "You don't have to do that," I told her once. "Do what?" "Share the burden." She looked at the dry blueberry muffin in her hand. "Some burdens improve when divided. That one won't." She laughed so suddenly that Lucy looked up from her drawing. I began noticing details. Mara took phone calls outside, even when it was cold. She spoke quietly, but people on the other end always seemed to stop talking when she did. Her watch was simple, silver, and probably worth more than my truck. Once, a man in a dark suit came to the library door and waited until she shook her head. He left without entering. I assumed she worked for a law firm. Lucy assumed she was a princess hiding from a wedding. "Princesses don't carry laptops," I said. "Modern ones do." Mara overheard that. "She's right," she said. "There's paperwork now." By December, the library had become the warmest place in my week. Outside, snow pressed against the windows. Inside, the children sat under paper stars while Mara read about a fox searching for home. Lucy leaned against Mara's side without asking. Mara did not move away. I watched from the end of the shelf, holding a box of replacement bulbs. For years, I had believed the safest way to love my daughter was to keep our life small, predictable, nothing that might disappear without warning. But a locked door keeps out more than loss. That was one of the hard lessons Mara never said aloud. She only kept showing up. One Saturday, she did not. Lucy sat on the blue rug with her arms folded. Maybe she's sick, I said. She would have told me. She doesn't have your number. She has the libraries. Mrs. Bell pretended to organize bookmarks. At 10:15, Lucy opened a book and tried to read to the younger children herself. She made it 3 pages before her voice broke. I sat beside her. We can take turns. I don't do the voices right. Nobody does. Mara does. At 10:23, the front doors opened. Mara hurried in with snow in her hair and one glove missing. "I'm sorry," she said, breathless. Lucy stood up. "You're late." "I know. 23 minutes. I deserve consequences." Lucy pointed to the chair. "Read 2 books." Mara put a hand over her heart. "Harsh but fair." She sat down. Only after the children settled did I notice the tear in her sleeve and the red mark along her wrist. "What happened?" I asked quietly. "Car trouble. You could have called. I thought I could solve it." "Did you?" She looked toward the window. A black sedan sat crooked by the curb, steam lifting from the hood. "No." I put on my coat. "You don't have to," she said. "I know." That was the thing between us by then. Neither of us did anything because we had to. I found a split coolant hose and made a temporary repair with tape and a clamp from my truck. Mara stood beside me in the snow, holding a flashlight. "You're going to ruin your shoes," I said. "They've survived worse meetings." "You wear those to meetings?" "Sometimes." "What kind of meetings?" "The kind with chairs." I laughed. She did not. Then she smiled and looked away. When the engine finally started, she rested her palm on the hood as if thanking the car for cooperating. "I owe you," she said. "No." "Daniel." "No." She studied me for a second. "You make it difficult to return favors. I'm not collecting." "That can be difficult too." Her voice had changed. Softer, but not lighter. I looked at the loose strand of hair stuck to her cheek. Before I could answer, Lucy opened the library door and shouted, "Mara, the rabbit loses his hat!" Mara stepped back. "Emergency," she said. "Go." She went. I stayed beside the car longer than necessary. 2 weeks later, a notice appeared on the library door. Public hearing. Proposed sale of the East Wing. The East Wing contained the children's section. The city claimed it could not afford repairs. A private education company had offered to purchase the space and convert it into offices. The company's name was Northline Children's Media. Lucy read the notice twice. "They can't sell the rug," she said. "It's not about the rug. They can't sell the stars either." Mara stood behind us, very still. Mrs. Bell came over with her lips pressed thin. "The meeting is Thursday," she said. "I am asking everyone to come." Mara folded the notice along the center. "Who proposed the sale?" "A regional director from Northline," Mrs. Bell said. "Evan Pike." Something passed across Mara's face. Not fear, recognition. "Do you know him?" I asked. "I know the type." At the public hearing, the council chamber was full. Parents sat with children on their laps. Teachers held folders. Evan Pike stood near the front in a charcoal suit, speaking to the mayor as if the room already belonged to him. Mara arrived alone. No cream cardigan this time. She wore a dark blue coat and carried the same leather bag. Lucy waved her over. Mara sat beside us. Pike gave a presentation about efficiency, modernization, and underused municipal assets. He called the children's wing non-essential floor space. Mrs. Bell gripped the edge of her chair. A teacher spoke first, then 2 parents, then a boy who forgot his words and cried. Pike smiled patiently through all of it. When my name was called, I walked to the microphone. I had not prepared much. Crowds make some men louder. They make me careful. I looked at Lucy, then at the paper stars visible through the chamber windows across the square. "My daughter learned to read in that room," I said. "But that's not the only thing she learned." Pike checked his watch. "She learned that adults can keep showing up. She learned that being listened to is different from being managed. And she learned that a public place does not become useless just because it fails to produce a profit." The room went quiet. I saw Mara lower her eyes. I continued. "You can measure square footage. You can count repair costs. But some rooms hold more than their walls." Pike leaned toward his microphone. "With respect, Mr. Hart, sentiment cannot fund infrastructure." "No," I said, "but indifference should not choose what deserves saving." He smiled without warmth. "And who do you suggest pays for it?" Before I could answer, Mara stood. She walked to the front. Pike's expression changed. Not much. Just enough. "Mara," he said. She placed her leather bag on the table and opened it. The room seemed to shift around her. She took out a thin folder, then another, then a tablet. The mayor frowned. "Ma'am, please state your name for the record." "Mara Vance." Pike looked at the floor. She continued. "Chief Executive Officer of Northline Children's Media." Lucy's mouth fell open. I thought I had misheard. Mara turned toward the council. M.R. Pike submitted this proposal without authorization from our board. He described the East Wing as vacant developmental space. He omitted current attendance numbers, literacy program outcomes, and the fact that Northline's own foundation awarded this library a community impact distinction 3 years ago. She slid copies of the reports down the table. Pike's face tightened. "This is an internal matter. It stopped being internal when you tried to take a children's room away from them." Nobody moved. Mara's voice stayed level. She did not raise it once. That made every word land harder. She explained that Northline would withdraw the purchase offer. Then she announced a grant to repair the roof, replace the heating system, and expand Saturday programming. Pike tried to interrupt. She looked at him. "Not every quiet room is empty." He stopped. I remembered the first day she had looked at the reading lamp and said the room was better. Now I understood that she had been watching the library all along, not as a project, as a person deciding what kind of power she wanted to use. After the meeting, people surrounded her. Teachers thanked her. Parents asked questions. "Mrs." Belle cried into a paper napkin. Lucy stood in front of Mara with both hands on her hips. "You're the boss?" Mara knelt. "Sometimes." "Of the car man?" "Yes." "And the book company?" "Yes." "Why didn't you tell us?" Mara glanced at me. "Because I liked being Mara here." Lucy considered that. "You can still be Mara." I was hoping you'd say that. Then Lucy hugged her. I waited until the room cleared. Mara stood near the chamber doors, holding her coat over one arm. "You knew," I said. "About the proposal?" "Not until the notice." "About all of it? The company, the grant, the reports?" "Yes. And every Saturday, you sat on the floor making owl noises." My owl was convincing. It was alarming. She smiled, but there was worry beneath it. "You're angry?" "No." "Surprised?" "Yes." "Embarrassed?" "A little." "Why?" "Because I repaired your car with plumbing tape." "It worked." "That is not the point." "It is exactly the point." We stood there with the empty chamber around us. She looked down at the leather bag. "I spend most of my week in rooms where people know my title before they know my name." At the library, Lucy asked me whether dragons needed windows. She was right about the ventilation. "She usually is." I nodded. Then I said, "You could have told me." "I could have." "Why didn't you?" Mara took a breath. "Because you never treated me like I owed you an explanation for being there." I had no answer. She stepped closer. "You fixed the lamp before you knew who I was. You stood beside my car before you knew what it cost. And tonight, you defended that room before you knew I could save it. I didn't do any of that for you." "I know." Her eyes held mine. That's why it mattered. The space between us changed. Not vanished. Changed. Lucy chose that moment to run back into the chamber. "Dad, Mrs. Belle says we can keep the rug." "Good. And Mara says we can get new stars." I looked at Mara. "She negotiated aggressively," Mara said. Lucy took both our hands. "Come on." We walked back across the square together. The next Saturday, Mara arrived at 9:58. Lucy checked the clock. Acceptable. Mara sat on the blue rug and opened a new book. I repaired nothing. For once, nothing needed it. I sat beside her while Lucy gathered the younger children. Mara leaned close enough that her shoulder touched mine. "People will know now," she said. "That you're the CEO? That I come here. Does that bother you?" "A little." "You could stop." She looked at Lucy. "No." I understood. Some choices become part of you before you realize you have made them. Weeks passed. Northline funded the repairs. Mara came every Saturday unless she was traveling, and when she traveled, she called Lucy from hotel rooms to read one chapter over video. I learned that she hated olives, forgot to charge her phone, and could negotiate a 9-figure contract, but could not assemble a flat-pack bookshelf without putting one panel backward. She learned that I took my coffee black, kept every drawing Lucy gave me, and still slept on one side of the bed. We did not rush. Grief does not disappear when something good arrives. It makes room slowly. One evening, after we finished installing new shelves in the library, Mara found me looking at the old brass lamp. "You could replace it," she said. "It still works. It flickers. Only when the wire shifts." She touched the base. "Some things deserve repair more than replacement." I looked at her. "That sounds like something a CEO would put on a poster. It sounds better without the title." "Yes," she smiled. Then she kissed me. It was quiet. No music, no applause. Just the hum of the heater and the faint smell of sawdust from the new shelves. When she pulled back, she said, "That was not part of the grant." I was going to ask, "You were taking too long." The following spring, Northline opened a small literacy studio beside the library instead of inside it. Mara insisted the children's wing remain public. Lucy designed the sign. It was crooked. Mara approved it immediately. A year later, the blue rug was still there, though the edges had been repaired. The paper stars had multiplied across the ceiling. My shop had a second employee, which meant I could leave before dark. On Saturdays, Mara still read. Sometimes people recognized her. Most learned not to interrupt. Lucy sat beside her, taller now, correcting the voices. I used to think I was bringing my daughter to the library because she needed stories. I was wrong. I brought her there because both of us needed proof that someone could enter our lives gently and still choose to stay. Mara never arrived like a storm. She arrived every Saturday. In the end, that was stronger. And the old brass lamp kept burning over all of us, steady whenever the room was full.